Cambridge IELTS Book 15. This is the first task in the book. It's a bar chart about coffee, and I'm going to go through and show you how I plan it first, and then I'm going to give you a model answer. The instructions for this chart are: the chart below shows the results of a survey about people's coffee and tea buying and drinking habits in 5 Australian cities. You can see my paraphrase here. I've paraphrased some of the key words. So where it says the chart, I'm going to say the bar chart. So basically the chart is general, and I'm going to make it more specific bar chart. I've observed with these IELTS tasks that typically they just mention something very general like chart, and so you can often paraphrase to bar chart or pie chart or line graph. So that's one of the ways you can show paraphrase to the examiner. Results of the survey, I could say data. I don't think I actually use this, but that's an option. People's, here we can say residents because of the context of the task. Tea, can't think of a way to rephrase that, or coffee. But we've got buying, we can rephrase to purchasing or purchased, as I'm going to use it in the task. And Australian cities, I'm going to say metropolitan areas. Now, these 5 cities that you'll see are all the capital cities, the state capitals in Australia. It doesn't mention this in the task instructions, so neither should you. Don't mention anything that's not included in the task instructions. So let's have a look at how we're going to plan it. And the first thing we're looking at is what sort of comment could we make for an overall summary. And what I've observed from this task is that overall going to a cafe is the highest. It's the highest for 4 out of the 5 categories. It's only in Adelaide, and that's just very minor. It is in Brisbane as well. So that's the highest one, and then the middle one is instant coffee, and then the lowest is fresh coffee. So that's going to be what my overall summary consists of, and it's also going to be the way I'm going to structure my task. I'm basically going to have 3 body paragraphs. I'm going to have a body paragraph about the green items, the cafe purchases. Then I'm going to have a paragraph about instant coffee purchases, and then finally a paragraph about fresh coffee. So roughly the plans for the paragraphs are going to look like this. I'm going to cover cafe first, and you can see that I'm going to mention Sydney, Melbourne and Hobart in the first sentence because they're all the highest, and then I'm going to cover the middle number, Brisbane, and then finally Adelaide. And Adelaide's a special case because it's the only city where cafe is not the highest category. So this is a kind of a key point, something that's worth highlighting, and something that would increase the score from maybe 7 to 8 and above for task achievement. Then on to our instant coffee paragraph. Again, we'll use the same structure. We'll have a sentence about the highest cities, Brisbane and Hobart. Then we'll go on to Adelaide second, and then special case, it's the highest. And then on to the 2 bottom numbers or percentages, Sydney and Melbourne. Finally, we'll have a paragraph about the lowest percentages of purchases, which are for fresh coffee, and the highest is in Sydney and Melbourne, so I'll have a sentence about that. Then I'll deal with the middle number, Hobart, and then Brisbane and Adelaide in the last sentence. Notice how I'm combining data. This is so you can get through the data in 20 minutes. By combining it, I'm able to cover it much more concisely. And also the combining is actually helpful for the reader. So the reader knows that Sydney and Melbourne are basically the highest, and that they're about, somewhere above 40%. This is making it easier for the reader. If you just mechanically list each of the cities, it starts to become meaningless to the reader. So your job as the writer is to highlight the data and make it easy for the reader to understand. Alright, so then I can actually start writing now. My first sentence, I paraphrase the instructions. So you can see up the top the instructions and then below what I've paraphrased.
Now let's see the model answer. The bar chart shows percentages from a study of residents who purchased coffee and tea in 5 metropolitan areas of Australia within the last 4 weeks.
I'm putting this last 4 weeks in here so that I don't have to keep mentioning it in the body of the report. Again, this will allow me to write concisely and finish the task within 20 minutes. Then we come on to our overall summary.
Overall, the highest percentages of purchases were for coffee and tea bought in coffee stores, followed by instant coffee, and then fresh coffee.
The tea was a bit of a nuisance in this. If I didn't have to cover tea, I would have been able to do this much better. You do need to mention tea. You can't just mention coffee in this report because of this annoying fact that we've got tea for one of the categories. Then our first body paragraph, which is the highest category.
Looking first at consumers of tea or coffee at cafes, the highest proportions were in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide, which all recorded a little over 60%.
So by putting these 3 different cities into this sentence, I'm able to deal with it more concisely and also highlight data for the reader, make it easy for the reader. Next sentence, deal with the middle numbers and the lowest.
This was followed by just under 55% in Brisbane, and then approximately 50% in Adelaide, which was the only city where this category was not the highest.
Then we go on to our next body paragraph for the second category of brought instant coffee in the last 4 weeks.
Turning to instant coffee, Brisbane and Hobart had the highest proportions at a little under 55% of residents.
So that's dealing with the 2 highest numbers. Then the middle number.
Adelaide was next with 50%, which accounted for their highest proportion for all types of purchases.
That little extra bit of information at the end of this sentence is useful. It's what turns this from a good report into an outstanding one. And then the lowest categories.
Sydney and Melbourne had the lowest at a little over 45% each.
Then we need to come on to the final category of fresh coffee. And again, we're going to deal with these from highest to lowest.
Finally, the highest proportion of fresh coffee consumers were in Sydney and Melbourne, which were both approximately 43%.
Middle number and lowest numbers.
Hobart followed with about 40%, and Brisbane and Adelaide had the lowest at approximately 35%. The bar chart shows percentages from a study of residents who purchased coffee and tea in 5 metropolitan areas of Australia within the last 4 weeks. Overall, the highest percentages of purchases were for coffee and tea bought in coffee stores, followed by instant coffee, and then fresh coffee. Looking first at consumers of tea or coffee at cafes, the highest proportions were in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide, which all recorded a little over 60%. This was followed by just under 55% in Brisbane, and then approximately 50% in Adelaide, which was the only city where this category was not the highest. Turning to instant coffee, Brisbane and Hobart had the highest proportions at a little under 55% of residents. Adelaide was next with 50%, which accounted for their highest proportion for all types of purchases. Sydney and Melbourne had the lowest at a little over 45% each. Finally, the highest proportion of fresh coffee consumers were in Sydney and Melbourne, which were both approximately 43%. Hobart followed with about 40%, and Brisbane and Adelaide had the lowest at approximately 35%.